Hello, everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
Welcome, welcome. We have a very, very, very special episode for you today. Oh my God.
Keeping this a secret from everyone has been so difficult because we didn't want to hint. We didn't want to say anything until we had it done.
Yes.
But we have a very special episode for you all today. Today we are interviewing Billie Mintz, the filmmaker of the Making Manson documentary, which is just launched on Peacock, as well as James Dawson of the Manson Archives.
And guys, I am vibrating right now.
We are so excited. I hope you all love this. I think you will. I'm not going to go too far into anything yet because I want to just dive into it. But as you all know, we did a 6-part series on Charles Manson. We started with our 100th episode of the show. It's someone who we love talking about, a fascinating case. This is an insight that I think may surprise you all. And we have some never before talked about stuff here. This is super exciting. So without further ado, Billie Mintz and James Dawson.
Well, first of all, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We have with us the wonderful Billie Mintz and also James Dawson from the Manson Archives. Again, thank you, and welcome.
So I finished up Making Manson very recently. It is fantastic. It came out on the 19th of November, correct?
That's correct. That would be James. That's what's the significance of that date? That was the anniversary of his death?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I didn't even put 2 and 2 together there. That's pretty significant.
He had been dead 7 years on the day it came out.
Wow.
How did the two of you get involved? How did you connect?
Well, I started diving in, and I think there's 2 ways to answer that question. First and foremost, James runs the Manson Archives, and that is one of the leading information depots of this entire case, along with Cielo Drive and a lot of the other books, especially George Stimson's Goodbye Helter Skelter. So it's a strong community of people that are fanatic about, not about Manson, but about figuring out this case and the ins and outs of the case. And I think John Michael Jones, subject of our documentary, forwarded me on to James, and James and I, James became my my rock.
That's pretty much how it went. John had contacted me and he's like, "Hey, can you help me with some stuff?" It's like, "Sure, John, I'll help you with what I can." And he's like, "Would you mind talking to the director for this documentary, Billie?" I said, "Sure." So phone numbers were exchanged and it went from there.
So, James, you must have then surely been a Manson historian for a very long time then. This has kind of been a huge thing for you for a long time.
Correct.
How did you get involved? What piqued your interest in Manson? Obviously a fascinating person and a fascinating subject, but what did it for you to get you to devote this much of your time to him?
When I was in 8th grade, my mother had the first edition copy of Helter Skelter.
Wow.
Now, when I decided to read it, she took the book from my hand, flipped it over, looked at it. She said, "Don't believe a single thing in this book."
Okay.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
When you guys started the documentary, I know we can't really give too much away because I do recommend everyone obviously watch it. We can. Perfect.
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. It's been out for a bit. If anything, let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, fantastic.
What was your goal with the documentary? What did you want people to kind of come away with after they've seen it? Because it is a very different approach from different ones that we've seen.
Well, I think it's just the biggest thing was just being truthful and honoring the material that we had. We had this great responsibility of 20 years of archive that nobody had heard before from Manson. And, when you think of, in retrospect, the context of it all is that all the people that have been telling the story about Manson only knew Manson for a short period of time, a year, maybe 2 years, and some of them not at all. Yeah. And there's been this 50-year collective narrative of Manson that goes forever. And that's sort of the go-to to telling the story of Manson. And I think it's very easy to fall into that without doing it. Just takes so much research. And luckily at Renowned Films and with helps of people like James at the Manson Archives, we had the ability to really research this and not just rest on this well-told, well-greased narrative. And I think my goal is not usually around storytelling because, let a story tell itself. But my goal around researching and being a part of a research team was to just continually ask questions every time you're told something. Don't just say, "Oh yeah, that's what happened." Ask, "Is that what happened?" And then go ask everybody. And James would James was I was like James' girlfriend, nonstop posting, nonstop texting him all day, all night, just being like, "Is this true? Is this true? Is this true?" And he schooled me all the time.
Well, I think one of the things that I especially very much appreciated about the documentary is that there's so many different perspectives from people from all walks of life. We're talking the journalists that were involved, family members themselves. And I thought it was interesting having their insight, that, like you say, that brief period of time when they might have come into contact with him, and how their perspectives were quite different across the board because of that.
I don't know how far you want to go into this, but what are your own personal feelings towards Charles Manson? Where is your head at with him and with everything that he said that he did and his stories?
James, I'm curious, what's yours? Because we never talked about that.
Yeah, we never talked about that. Certainly, I don't think he was a good man.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's not the same man that was portrayed by the media. I guess you could say on some level, the girls and some of the guys were correct that he was a mirror that would reflect back what you wanted to see. If you wanted to see this crazy hippie cult leader, that's what he gave back into the media. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he was a good man, definitely, because he did do some very, very bad things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's not the man that the media portrayed.
Mm-hmm. And adding on to that, here's a guy who had not only a lifetime of incarceration, a lifetime of child abuse, etc., but he had mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the understanding that we have about mental health back then. It was, stigmatized. It was sensationalized. And if you watch the videos and you understand that he has severe mental health issues, and you don't add those mental health issues that he brainwashed a bunch of people to commit a bunch of murders, and you just leave it like, here's a guy with mental health issues being accused of those things. That's the reaction you're going to get from a guy like that.
Yeah. And one of the things that, when I found out what Billy decided he was going to do with the film, I was completely on board with it, 100%. The story's been told about that's every time Charlie's been in an interview or parole hearings or even in the courtroom, it was all around the official narrative. But with this particular documentary, you're getting Charlie's own version of events that's never been told by Charlie. Such as, for example, when he said that Susan Atkins handed him the knife, if you look at the police reports, the evidence reports of the Tate residence, her knife was never found. She lost her knife. She went to get a knife for Linda's knife, but Susan's knife that she claimed she lost was never found at the residence. So she may have given that to Charlie. And that's one thing that's known with killers. They are known to take a trophy.
Very much so. Do you think, that all being said, with the mental health and just, obviously it's mentioned a lot that everyone, for lack of a better term, was off their tits on LSD for a big chunk of this, that all kept in mind, do you think if this case were tried today, would it have had a very different outcome for Charles Manson than it did in those days?
Well,
go, James.
Go ahead, Billy.
I know this is a very hypothetical question, so you can really, but just your thoughts on that.
Well, listen, I spend a lot of my life in courtrooms, watching the exact same thing going on as what went on there. Watching, the justice system is not about finding the truth. It's about who can tell a better story and what will the jury believe. And, my father always told me, 98% of the world are morons. So chances are on a jury, you're going to have a bunch of morons. And chances are the prosecutor is a moron. And I've seen my share of morons prosecuting people who believe these wild tales told by investigators who are also morons. And so I think it would be a different, not necessarily a different outcome. Maybe we would have more access, but like a courtroom is not like the pinnacle of our intelligence. It's
Agreed.
still,
Yes.
it's still I spend my life investigating malfeasance and corruption in our justice system. So this is ongoing. And as a filmmaker, even though, there's like a constant supply of this nonsense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we can both agree on that one. I mean, covering a lot of different cases, we see the lapses in the legal system and in the justice system. And yeah, things fall through the cracks. Absolutely.
And another thing, too, if Tex Watson had been at that particular trial, Charlie may have walked free.
We actually do want to talk about Tex Watson because I would love to know your feelings about him because when we covered Manson, we looked through his website in pretty big detail and his podcasts and all of the stuff that he's putting out. And I'm so curious to know what your thoughts are on him and what he's doing and how he's portraying himself now.
Let me give my layman's take on it, and then James, you can follow up with your expertise. Is that the entire thing hinges on this order to kill? That's Manson's involvement. So they stretch it a little bit by saying he brainwashed them and controlled their minds, but their minds, but really it comes down to Manson's involvement and culpability that he was tried for and convicted for was this order to kill. Now, not only do we learn later on that the only person who heard this order to kill is Tex Watson. Only person. There wasn't a them. There wasn't a group because, the order was in this private conversation between Tex and Manson that only Tex and Manson are aware of. And then, further on that it was Manson telling the girls, do what Tex tells you.
Yep.
Right? Which is stupid of Manson to just like sort of give this, like, it's like giving a blank check. Like, hey, whatever Tex tells you, do it. That's my order. Is do what Tex tell you. So in a way, Manson is responsible for telling them to do what Tex tells them. But the only person we ever heard about Manson's order to kill, with which he was convicted for, was from Tex. Now, here's the clincher, is we never even heard that in the trial. That didn't actually happen. Manson was convicted without even Tex Watson's testimony that there was an order to kill, because Tex Watson was in Texas at the time waiting for his own trial.
Yep. It is still pretty wild to me that he was not tried with the rest of them. It seems very, very odd.
And then he got to watch the whole thing, learn the whole thing by the time his trial came on.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It was much easier to fill the gaps when he knew what the narrative was.
And he did admit to reading Helter Skelter several times before writing his book.
Yep. Yeah, he's an interesting character because, I mean, even just the podcast episodes that he's putting out and the interviews that he's putting out are a very different approach that you would assume, because he's really going for the, I've changed kind of narrative now, which is why I'm curious about with you guys and how you feel about what he's saying and how he's trying to portray himself.
Tex has never changed. He's always going to be a liar. What people need to pay attention to, and this is something I pointed out to Billy a couple of days ago, is the parole hearings, Texas parole hearings, because in the parole hearings, he starts to slowly admit the things that Charlie had said was true. Like he admitted in 2016, his 2016 parole hearing, that yes, Charlie and I did have this conversation where he felt that I owed him over the Bernard Crowe fiasco. But not a lot of people pay attention to his parole hearings, and Tex had said that his stories remain the same. His story has never remained the same.
That's true.
There's also another thing that is kind of, ridiculous is I don't know, James, you'll tell me where this comes from, but where he audibly was hearing Charlie in his head. Where did that come from? Like what? Because
that was during
so many sources.
Yeah,
right.
He did say that in the trial, and he also said in a parole hearing. I can't remember the year. It might have been the last parole hearing where he finally admitted that Charlie had no way of knowing what was going to go on. He was in control.
Right. And so here we got this order to kill that only Tex knows about.
Mm-hmm.
And Tex is the only person that heard it. And in the same breath, Tex is saying he's hearing Charlie's voice in his head. So how can he distinguish between what's the voice, the Charlie voice in his head and what Charlie actually said? And remember, keep in mind, like he was like a full on meth head.
Yeah.
So he was like fully drugged out on a 3-day bender, out of his mind.
Where any idea, no matter how bad it was, sounded like a good idea to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for that alone, it brings enough into question. Did the conversation between Manson and Tex ever happen in the first place?
Yes, it did happen.
Okay.
This is something that Charlie has always maintained. Tex, there's even
we have it in the tapes. It's not in the film, but it's in the tapes.
Yeah.
It didn't make it in the film, but he says that he did say, "You owe me." He said that, he said even stuff like, it's like you owe me a life. Like I took a life, you owe me life. Because at this time he thought that he killed Bernard Crowe.
Right.
So he was under the impression that not just Tex owed him, but Tex owed him a life. So, there's culpability there.
Yeah.
And remember, the one thing you said about these people being on acid, these are like one of them was 15 years old. These are 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. These are dumb people. I mean, dumb to start with, but like also 19 and dumb. Yeah. And so we had that, but he did say, he did when John Michael Jones presses him on it, he does say that like, he didn't care what he did. He was like with a girl. He didn't care. He just wanted him out of it. Like he wanted, like, remember, we're dealing with a crazy guy. Like Charlie was nuts. And he was just like this nuts guy who, like, you go up to him and he's going to talk a bunch of nonsense. And that's like, there's this great interview with Harold True where like the reporter keeps trying to get something, and Harold True is saying like, no, you don't understand. These people are crazy. And not like crazy, like killer crazy. They're just crazy. Like nothing is real with these people.
Well, the one thing that really stuck with me was, and you mentioned it before, is that he was someone a little bit different for everybody. And so I feel like for Charlie, he's going to match the energy that's coming to him. So if in this case, Tex is coming to him in a pretty frantic state, as he seemed to be, Charlie's going to match that with him, right? So,
but not like, I don't see that as almost like, I'm not trying to advocating on Charlie here, but I'm like trying to keep my mind in a crazy person. Like it's not like he was doing it on purpose. That's
no, by no means.
It's like, somebody come, it's like, you come at me with a lot of energy, I'll come back at you with a lot of energy.
Exactly. And yes.
He was
and have you ever,
like
he was, a mirror. Like it wasn't him that was doing it. It's like everybody saw themselves in Charlie. So it's like because Charlie maybe didn't have like a personality himself. He didn't have an identity. So, and his whole thing was about not having an identity. So when somebody, like that was his message, was not to have an identity. So if you're not going to have an identity and you don't know who you are, which is probably like what that was, you're going to be like what anybody wants you to be at the time, which a lot of people do. And that is a very manipulative thing, but it's not a purposely manipulative. It's he wanted people to like him. That's why he manipulated them, because in the way, like it was unconscious. It was like of course, we're just like, making guesses here.
What are your thoughts on family members who've been paroled since everything happened? Do you think that they should be getting paroled? Do you think that they should be able to monetize off of what they've done and write books and stories and things like that?
Well, can they? I don't think they can because of like Summer Sam, right? Son of Sam laws. They're
The
not
Son
allowed
of
to.
Sam laws, but they're not applicable in every state. So some
What?
I know
Oh,
have
I
been
didn't know
able
that.
to do. Yeah, it's only in certain states. So some of them have been able to put out books or through a person do interviews, put out a book, and then they benefit in some other way.
I had heard that Leslie's writing a book.
That's what I read,
I had,
which is
she's
interesting.
living with the author, the co-author of her book, but
I don't know. The question is like, is there a opportunity not just for redemption, but like forgiveness? And can like, if somebody serves their time, can they go on even though they've taken people's lives? I mean, that's a personal
philosophical question.
It's like a sort of a conservative liberal belief system that we're polarized on. Should we have capital punishment? Should we have? I mean, just luckily, like I am, not in a position that my opinion matters about that.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I had heard that, for example, that there's someone else who knew Charlie that he was pretty upset that Susan Atkins didn't get a compassion release.
Because
really?
she's sick.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I could see that.
He loved everybody.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like Charlie never had a bad word for anybody. Like even like the way he talked about Tex Watson, like he's my brother. It just shows like he's not cognitive on that level. Like he lives in his own fantasy. And John Michael Jones, like there's just so much in these tapes that we didn't get to use in the film. But John Michael Jones was like, but he screwed you. He screwed you. And Charlie has like a really like compassionate philosophical response to it. So it's
he was
interesting.
a good soldier.
I will say I was actually, as I started watching just the first episode and, everyone is being introduced, I was a little shocked to see how much compassion that Diane Lake and Catherine Sher still seem to have for him because I mean, this is obviously my own biases coming into play, but so much time has passed for them to look back and sort of analyze everything. And like you say, from Charles, there was a lot of compassion for everyone as well. But on the other side, Diane and Catherine, they were very candid with the way they spoke about him, but still had a lot of care for him, it seemed. And that was surprising to me.
I just remember that like they had a relationship with him before the Charlie we know is the murder Charlie, is the mind control, serial cult leader. But that wasn't their experience. And one of the things that I think the doc does really well is even the police that arrested him out in the desert couldn't see that this is the guy that did the murders. Like nobody could believe, like the biggest storytellers of Greg Jacobson, who's one of the people who made Manson who he was, the Manson we know. He's like one of the main storytellers of like this crazy thing. Even him saying like he didn't believe it when he heard it, like, and so that really shows us like they knew the real Charlie, not the Charlie that was invented afterwards. And so what we really tried to do and focus on in the documentary was like, hey, I need you to get this 50 years of retelling the story of your relationship with Charlie out of your mind right now. I need to start in the first 2 years, and I really want to see what your relationship was like with him. And it was a relationship of love, and there was abuse for sure, as there would be when you're dealing with a guy with all these drugs, who's mentally ill, who's been in jail his whole life and doesn't know boundaries and doesn't know and only knows violence. Like, I mean, that's going to happen. And I'm not absolving him. Like he very terrible things happen. But even the one thing that like right at the end, which, I would have hoped came a little earlier, but you really have to play that. You can't just take one side with the doc, is that
of course,
Diane breaks down and she says like, I don't even know what's true. Like, I don't even know what happened and what Diane has this amazing book. Her book is fantastic. And a lot of the book was not necessarily written by her. It was researched by her co-writer. And it's infused in her own experiences. But Diane was a 14-year-old at the time. She didn't know, like half the stuff in the book didn't even happen to her. She's just telling the Manson story. And so when it comes to like telling the truth, which you don't get a lot of opportunity in this narrative to tell the truth. It was very hard even in our doc to tell the truth because you're so drawn to this other story, and it's so much easier, the low-bearing fruit, to tell this other story, and you don't necessarily have the resources to investigate. And not every doc has a Manson Archives to help them.
Mhm.
Not every doc has Cielo Drive to help them. And so they just, I believe that they fell into not just their, collective retelling of the story that they're influenced by, but also this confirmation bias of like lazy journalism and lazy filmmaking that preceded this film.
Yeah, and I can imagine when you hear so many recollections of your own story by different people, that can confuse you, especially if it's something that happened when you're 14 years old and you hear it for 50 years. It's a different story every time.
Yeah,
You're
it's
not going
false
to know
memory
anymore.
syndrome.
Exactly.
Two things to add into what Billy said. The first edition of Helter Skelter, and I actually sent this to Billy in a text message, read, "The story you are about to read will scare the hell out of you."
Mm-hmm.
The second one,
Absolutely.
that one, I mean, it's a scary
Because it's a made-up scary story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sells. And, it's people will believe that. And another thing that I wanted to say was something Patricia Krenwinkel said in a parole hearing in 92 was she doesn't know. She was asked about something she said, and she said, "I don't know if I said that." She said, because there's been so many things written about this case and said about this case that I don't know if I said that or not.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
even I
exactly.
think John Michael Jones specifically does say in the beginning, everything written about Manson is contradicted in these tapes. That is so crazy to me that we have, as you say, 50 years of history coming from all these different perspectives. And then yet when you have the word from the horse's mouth, as it were, everything's contradicted again. Now, yes, many people did say, like, take everything he says with a huge handful of salt. But usually there is, when you have two different perspectives, they meet somewhere in the middle. But to still have everything so wildly contradicted is very unusual to me.
Well, there's just so many players, right? There are so many people. There are so many eyewitnesses that were either there or not there that you have to go through everybody's bullshit. Like,
Totally.
Yeah.
you're not just dealing with one person you're dealing with this group of people that are all kind of like dishonest people for many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And to add on to that, Gypsy said something that was very interesting too. When she released a bombshell that she had went to Doris Day's house in Malibu.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was crazy.
Well, we've been trying to do a little paper trail, and so far that I have gotten, when Phil Kaufman was interviewed with Aaron Stovitz, Aaron says to Phil, "I know that Charlie knows that Terry Melcher didn't live there anymore." And then
You mean at Cielo Drive?
Yes. And then
right, because the whole thing is about that Manson, because he was rejected by Terry Melcher, he sends out texts to go like kill everybody at Terry Melcher's house to go get Terry Melcher. But what we learned from Gypsy is that he knew that he wasn't there. And not only did he know, but Tex was always up there. Tex knew that he wasn't there.
And Ella Jo Bailey, who was another one, she left after the murder of Gary Hinman. She felt like she didn't feel responsible, but she felt guilty for the murder. She also said that they knew that Terry Melcher wasn't living there. And of course, if you believe the official narrative, Terry Melcher was terrified of Charlie and this, that, and the other. But if you look at Terry Melcher's transcripts, he didn't even make a connection to the murders in himself. And he did an interview with Rolling Stone in 74. I just recently found it working on this paper trail, where he said that Charlie had visited Doris Day's house on good terms.
Wow.
Oh, and also, don't we know that Terry Melcher would after the murder had spent a number of times at Spawn Ranch as well?
Yes.
So for a guy who's so afraid of Charlie, what was he doing there and didn't know about the murders?
I was able to find paper from Bugliosi where when he was questioning Danny DiCarlo, Danny puts him at Barker Ranch. So that would have been September or October because they were busted at Barker Ranch. after the Tate LaBianca murders, that's when everybody basically left Spawn Ranch, with the exception of a few girls like Sandra and Lynette and Cappy. Cappy was going, she would go back and forth. But everybody else had gone out to Barker. Now, why is Terry Melcher going out to Barker if he's scared of Charlie?
Absolutely. The last place you would want to be would be in the middle of the desert with someone you think might hurt you.
Trying to kill you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you think that this documentary is going to change the public's perception of Charlie? Do you think it's going to paint a little bit of a different picture? Because like you said, there is an image of him that's been created, and this is a different version of that story.
When the Time Magazine article, 17-page article in Time Magazine comes out saying we need to relook at this crime, we need to relook at the Charles Manson, or Time Magazine, I think that's already done it. And just that, just the, interviews like this and also like larger publications, I think it's done, and just giving that a voice, I think it's done a fantastic job. And for me, it's not about exonerating Charles Manson.
Yeah.
That's not my thing. It's exonerating every other person in history and every other person to come that have gone through something similar and continues to go through something similar. You got what's his name? Robbie Robertson. I don't know if you guys know Robbie Robertson, the autistic man in Texas who's on death row for, essentially killing his child, and he didn't do it. And everybody knows he didn't do it, but it's such a story and scary story. And the powers that be in Texas want, because of their political beliefs, they want this capital punishment to fulfill itself. And so it's, Charlie has this sort of he's this icon that, of course, he was the poster boy for cult leaders. And maybe now he's going to be the poster boy for people who are, caught up in a legal system that isn't actually out to find the truth. Because once you have the media involved, they're selling papers, they've got their agenda. You got the prosecution that wants a win. You've got the investigators that need a closure to this. So that's for me, that's what I think is happening. And I think everybody will go back and watch these truth bombs that Charlie was dropping in these interviews, that we were too biased to see what he was saying. And I think now having this new foundation of understanding, okay, maybe that wasn't the truth and maybe there's another truth. Let's go back and see what Charlie had to say. I think he was giving us a lot, because he wasn't trying to say I'm innocent. He was just like, you know what? Fuck me, fuck you. And
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what was he said? I'm not saying I'm innocent. I didn't break the law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. For me, a huge part of that was Linda Deutsch, the journalist. I love that when she's first introduced, she literally says, "I hope you're not going to try to exonerate Manson. I don't want any part of it if you are." And I thought that was so funny right off the bat that she was like, But then as you get her perspective on it, she said, one, he couldn't help but be a criminal. His childhood, he was straight into incarceration throughout his life. He couldn't help it because he had never known anything else. In that sense, he didn't get to grow up with a normal brain development, if you will. And then she said, the first time you saw him after he was arrested, you saw how small he was, and how when he's looking around at all these cameras and all these
She called him a nerd.
Exactly. She's like, he was just a little nerd. Like, what was all the fuss about, basically?
Yeah. Linda, God bless her soul. She just passed away. And I loved talking to her. It was just amazing. And she sent me some really beautiful emails following up, saying it was one of the best interviews she ever had. She also admits that she never believed Helter Skelter. She never believed Bugliosi. And, I don't think that's ever been sort of given word to. Like, nobody's ever questioned Helter Skelter before. Have they, James? Has Helter Skelter been, besides George Stimson's book, Goodbye Helter Skelter?
Yeah.
In the mainstream media and the documentaries that are told, they just keep sticking. What about the last one, the Helter Skelter myth, the American myth? Did that question it at all?
It kind of revolved around it, but no, not really. There's never
It didn't
been.
question.
There was a documentary before this one, which was done by Buddy Day. I'm sure you probably saw it. It's called Manson: The Final Words, and it's just people going in a circle. It starts off like, well, no, this is Helter Skelter was not the cause for the murders. And then you got like an investigative journalist saying, well, this has happened. But if you look at the facts, how did they get money to pay the straight Satans for Bobby's bad drug deal when they were trying to find money to get Mary Bruner out of jail on the 2 nights that the Tate and LaBianca murders happened? But none of it revolves around what Charlie's version of events, and that's what this documentary does, even though it's post-human.
Right.
Was there anything else that, because obviously so many hours of tapes, you can't include everything. Was there anything else that you weren't able to include in the documentary that you think people might really want to know?
That was something I actually wanted to ask Billy what Linda had to say about the Helter Skelter party.
Oh, that didn't make it in the film?
No.
Oh, the Helter Skelter party.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a whole thing. I'll send you some of it.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, she attended that party.
No, she talks about it. We talk about it at great length.
Yeah, it did.
And so I don't know if you guys know this, but what he's talking about is that they. Well, you tell what happened
during the trial. I'll actually send them the original flyer when we're finished. But during the trial, Vincent Bugliosi, the media, and Ronald Hughes, who was Leslie Van Houten's defense attorney, attended a, quote, Helter Skelter party. And
like a Halloween party.
Yeah, the media came in with nooses around their necks, X's on their heads. And
they dressed up as like parts of like the ridiculous things that happened at this trial.
Yeah.
They all dressed up as that.
And this should have been cause for a mistrial.
100%.
Who was the original prosecutor, knew Helter Skelter was fiction. He was kicked off the case because of an interview he gave to Rolling Stone magazine. And it was Judge Keene or it was Judge Oder one felt that Aaron Stovitz was going to do what Vincent Bugliosi had done. And of course, Vincent beat him to it.
Got it.
And of course, Vince Bugliosi was convicted for perjury for leaking stuff to the media that wasn't true. Like there was a supposed hit list of like Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, and other celebrities that the so-called Manson family were going to kill. That's not true. There was never any list.
There's so much about this story that people just don't know, but they have such a strong opinion about it.
Right.
And it's those little pieces like that I think are so important to tell.
When it comes to the technicality of the court, Charles Manson was tried and convicted on the very first day of the trial by the media and by President Nixon.
Yes, and that is obviously mentioned in the documentary too, how that swayed everything. As soon as Nixon said something, it was over.
Yep. That should have been grounds for a mistrial.
There's lots of stuff on the tapes. Like I'm going through them all still with John Michael Jones. We're working on but possibly doing a podcast where we just go through, like I put all the tapes in chronological order of like the first one, and we're just going to go through each one at the same time and just talk about it. Talk about what
that
he
would
said.
be amazing. My God.
Yeah, that'd be cool because like he says some wild stuff. And I was just looking through my notes. There was something that I actually just found like a couple of days ago, but I got so much in my head I don't remember what it was. But it was pretty amazing, and I can't believe we missed it for the doc. But it was pretty amazing. It's just wild to just like hear him talk and listen to the things he says about his life and about history and about. I mean, it's wild. He's kind of like. There's just so many funny stories that he tells about, like, and funny, like just tragic about his criminal past.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, for 20 years of conversations, that's, I mean, obviously hundreds and hundreds of hours. So I was going to initially say, I mean, hey, that's enough for a whole other documentary. But like you say, perhaps a podcast is a much better format for it, because I would imagine you could still be talking about this for years to come.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it's like, once you catch this bug,
It's a rabbit hole you can't get out of.
yeah, it's so fun. And it's funny, like when I talk, like this is my first time doing an interview with James, and I talk, and it's kind of like this, how it was through the whole process. I feel like I'm James' student, and like I talk, and then I'm like, how's that, James? How'd I do? How'd I do? Yeah.
Well, I mean, when Billy and I first connected, I mean, I believe, if I remember correctly, I'd have to go through, what was it, over a year's worth of text messages, where I think that he had read, I know you had read Helter Skelter, if I remember correctly, but there was another book you had read too, and that was basically all you knew, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be, actually, by the time I contacted you, the only book I read, I think, was where I started to read with you, with Goodbye Helter Skelter.
Yeah. Which George's book should be read by anybody that studies the case, because it's the only book that counters Helter Skelter. And of course, his partner is Sandra Good, who was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't plug that book enough. That's and George. George is an amazing guy. He's in our documentary.
Yeah.
He's such a knowledgeable, humble, really cool dude. And for me, it was like, that was my biggest pressure. John Michael Jones and George that was the biggest pressure I was under, was whether they are going to be okay with the end product.
Yeah, because you were talking that at dinner.
I was going to ask you that as well, because you have such an amazing group of people with all those different perspectives. Was it difficult sort of seeking them out and wrangling them? Was anyone hesitant to be a part of this, or was everyone pretty on board to talk about it?
Okay, well, just to be clear, I worked for a production company in the UK.
Yes, yep.
That they had an awesome team of producers and researchers who did most of that.
Got it.
If not, I mean, all of it. I was more responsible for peripheral stuff, like George and James. But they were just really amazing people. Really spoke, really connect. They were able to really connect with these people. And of course, there was a lot of hesitation. There was a lot of trying to convince people, because not only are there's Manson fatigue out there, and they don't want to do it anymore, but they don't trust the media. George would come to the interview, as did Gypsy, with a tape recorder, just because they did not. And that was part of, like, we had to work these deals out with them, which, is unfortunate, because that's just the nature of my industry and documentary filmmaking, is they didn't want to be taken out of context. And they were very nervous about that.
Especially, like you say, is that, people had come to them in the past and be like, well, you said this. And they're saying, well, I did I? I don't know that I did. So I can understand the hesitation and perhaps the little bit of paranoia there as well, because you don't want to be taken out of context with something as heavy as a case like this.
And then George knows that firsthand, because, like I said, he's partners with Sandra Good, and people think she's a lunatic, and she's always taken out of context. Like, there was an interview she did where somehow there's this conspiracy theory out there that they knew Sharon was not supposed to have been at home that night. And they started that conspiracy theory from the Patrice Berry show, where Sandra tells Patty Tate she shouldn't have been there. And what Sandra was talking about was she shouldn't have been in Hollywood, because Hollywood was exploiting her more than Vincent Bugliosi.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. The documentary was fantastic. I'm so glad that you guys took the time to talk to us about it, because it's a story that clearly needs to be told, because there's so much confusion when it comes to it. So you guys, you did an absolutely amazing job with it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was, and again, not to beat the horse, but like, we had amazing support. We Peacock really wanted to tell this story. They were so supportive of breaking the mold. renowned, was, this so much, provided so many resources for this. And we had such an amazing team of highly intelligent and thoughtful people. And I'm just so proud of it.
I mean, you should be, because it
Yeah,
absolutely
phenomenal.
shows. I thoroughly enjoyed, and there was definitely things I learned that I had not
Yeah.
heard of before. So,
Absolutely.
and I mean, I think that's always important. Obviously, you don't want to be saying, or rather telling, the same story again, because otherwise, what's the point? And I do think that this documentary offered not only a different perspective, but many different perspectives on the words of Charles Manson right from the horse's mouth.
There's, of course, you have to take a lot of stuff Charlie says with a grain of salt.
Mhm.
Yes.
But when you have things that he says that you can go back and you can look at evidence, and when he says Susan handing him a knife, okay, where did Susan's knife go that she claims she lost at the Tate residence? So there's got to be
Mhm.
what he's saying there.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
And Gypsy saying, well, we went to Terry Melcher's house, Doris Day's house in Malibu. Well, I've got Ella Jo Bailey, I've got Terry Melcher himself, and I've got Phil Kaufman all saying that they knew that Terry had moved. Even Leslie Van Houten stated she knew that they had moved because she and Brenda McCann went to the Malibu house.
Yeah, crazy.
James and I are going to write a book together.
Do it.
Absolutely
You have to.
should. Absolutely.
Yeah.
With the wealth of knowledge that you have, I think it would be a crime not to.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're in process.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We really
Thanks so
appreciate you
much.
taking the
Thank you.
time. This was fantastic. This
Yeah,
was amazing.
Absolutely. A
to
wonderful
meet you
opportunity
guys.
to talk to you guys. Likewise.
Yeah, definitely. And good luck with anything you do in the future, because it's going to be awesome.
Beautiful.
Before we
Thank
head
you.
out, I wanted to ask our host, what did you get from the documentary? What was your take?
I think it really did a good job of humanizing him.
Yes.
It really did. That was something that I enjoyed, because a lot of the time with Manson, when we covered him, it was a 6-part series on
Something
him.
like
So we
that,
talked
yeah.
about him a lot, but I really enjoyed that it wasn't one of those cases where they're putting him up on this pedestal of being this criminal mastermind who brainwashed people and made women fall in love with him. It really did a good job of showing he was just a guy.
Yeah. I agree. I think even to some degree, in my head, I had sort of built him out to this, I don't know, monstrous murdering cult leading machine almost. And then when you start to hear the conversations, you realize that that's absolutely not the case. And to be fair, there are very few human beings on this planet that really do fulfill the category of, serial killing monster machine.
Mhm.
And when you hear Manson, having these conversations that maybe aren't even to do with the case or the family altogether, you realize, like Dina said, he's just a man. That's all it is.
And that was something also, because when we were working on our series on him, I had read Manson in his own words,
Yes.
which is wild, first of all. And again, you have to take it with a huge, huge grain of salt, but it's, you really kind of hear him for who he is. And you see the mental health issues that are there. You see who he was, and that he wasn't at all what he's been portrayed as. Not even
And Buddy
close.
made up a lot of that shit as well, right?
Oh,
James?
of course. Yeah,
I think-
absolutely.
Like you say, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people would still agree this was a bad man, a bad individual. But I think he was a product of his entire life. And
a
perhaps-
product of the system.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Because the system failed him from that first time that he was incarcerated.
He's a product of the American institutions.
Yeah,
Everything
absolutely.
he learned it not only from his family, from his mother and his uncle, but
Mhm.
being in prisons and juvenile hall and all of that. It's the product of the institutions is the only way to put it.
You
Mhm.
can't come out of that unscathed.
No. And you're going to pick up those ways, and you're going to, when he learned about pimping from some pimps that were in the jail. So Charles Manson was a very, very, very bad criminal that was always.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes. 100%. But yeah, not quite the genius mastermind that I think a lot of people think he is or was.
Certain. That's the one thing I got from these tapes is not a genius.
Yeah.
Not a mastermind. A highly interesting guy. But when you listen to 20 years of him talking, that guy did not mastermind anything.
No.
I doubt he could even mastermind going to the bathroom. But
what's interesting about all this is like, see right there?
Yep.
That's Charlie.
Oh.
He's just over my shoulder watching us.
Right? Right? Through the window.
That is actually at him. Can you see what I'm pointing at?
I don't.
No.
Yeah, I can.
I can just.
It's a vial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Filled with his ashes.
Whoa.
As well as his hair, his beard hair, some of his shirt when he passed away.
Oh my God.
And the rubber band for his hair, and his perfume.
Are you willing to bring that closer to the camera so we can take a look at it? Thank you.
That's quite the memento mori.
He sits there and watches the view.
Oh, thank you for being here with us, Charlie.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's amazing.
Oh, I see now. That is one hell of a memento mori.
Wow.
Insane.
That is what I did not expect that. That is amazing.
I mean, that is something that you can definitely say, I only got this. No one else on this planet has this.
I think 6 or 7 people have it. At least this thing. This is
wow.
A little gift from John Michael Jones.
Speaking of
he sits here and watches the jungle, watches the chickens.
Probably the best view he's had in a long, long time.
Speaking of, he's finally free.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of John Michael, his father just passed away the day before Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's so sad.
I've been keeping up with him. He's doing okay.
He's doing all right.
Good.
Yeah, and even John Michael gets like a bad rep, but he's one of the kindest, funniest people that you could ever meet.
Very sweet guy.
Yeah.
Very sweet guy.
I'm glad that you said that because I did some digging on kind of what people have said about him. And he does. People are always going to have strong opinions, and it's often people who are somewhat misunderstood that are some of the kindest.
Well, it goes back to 2 ex-friends of his. They used him really bad and asked him for some pictures, and the next thing you knew, it was all over TMZ.
Oh, wow.
And when he called them out for it, they started slandering him. It's the only way to put it.
Mm-hmm. That's terrible.
I think there's a lot of a stigma because that he had this, relationship with Charles Manson, and so I think people, have this like preconceived notion of what that means. But an incredible person, incredibly insightful, very caring, cares a lot about a lot of things, and just like to have that level of compassion for somebody like Charles Manson and continue a relationship with him for 20 years. And
to have a 20-year relationship with someone like Charles Manson. Well, yes, with anyone.
Anybody,
but like he says in the doc as well, like, why me? I wrote to him, with the idea to get his autograph. But of all the people, of all the hundreds of letters he must have been receiving, why him?
The poem made the connection.
Yeah. Yep. And then a 20-year relationship out of it. It's pretty amazing.
But I also think like that, I imagine, I don't know what the real, but I imagine he responded to a lot of people. I imagine he had a lot of phone calls, but I think the onus was on John Michael Jones to keep it going. I think a lot of
Yes.
people probably grew tired of Charles Manson. For John Michael Jones to like keep picking up the phone and keep investing his time and investing his emotions and investing his care and the care that he gave him, I think that's why they had such a relationship, and they're very similar people. They had a lot of similar experiences, and there was a lot of healing, I think, that these two men gave each other.
I'm sure, absolutely.
And trust. Trust.
Yeah, well, there's a huge sense of camaraderie between them. You could tell just from how they spoke to each other.
John was one of the Charlie would have falling out with just about everybody in his life. I mean, I know of one person that knew him in the 80s, and then they had a falling out over money, and they didn't reconnect for 15 years, and they had to go through John Michael to reconnect with Charlie. But Charlie had a lot of trust in John Michael. He may have been the only person that he trusted for those 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can tell with the way that they speak to each other. It's almost a little brotherly. Like you can tell the close. Yeah, absolutely. And that was something he said a lot, was "You're my brother" to so many different people that he was not even that close with, right? So for him to actually be like that with somebody, I think is huge.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys again so much. We
Thanks
appreciate
so much.
you both. Best of luck with everything in the future.
Yes.
The book, the podcast, because I want to see both of those.
Yeah,
things
we
happening.
will be staying tuned.
Yes, absolutely.
They'll go on for years.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks to you.
What else is there to say? This was an incredible opportunity to pick the brains of two very, very, I mean, I'm at a loss for words.
Just brilliant human beings.
Yes. Fantastic conversations, amazing insight, and just a wonderful opportunity for our wee humble little true crime podcast. So thank you again to Billie and James. So
these are two people that we both have a lot of respect for.
Yes.
The documentary is phenomenal. Again, it's Making Manson. It's out on Peacock. I highly recommend watching it, whether or not you know a lot about the case or not, because there is just so much information that is very interesting. And like we said in the interview, it really humanizes Charles Manson without any attempt at exonerating him, but for showing him for who he really was.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on, like you said, what your thoughts are on Manson, this definitely, it provides some insight. It gives a different perspective, and actually a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different people. I don't know, man. I'm just so excited that we've done this. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Yeah.
If you have any thoughts or anything you want to share about the interview, thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com. We'd love to hear them.
Of course.
We are going to be, as always, posting little clips and teasers on our social media. But if you want to see the whole video, which I highly recommend, again, who would have thought we would have Charles Manson's ashes in the video? That blew my mind.
I was going to say, that was very unexpected. We did not know that was going to happen ahead of time. Pretty wild thing to be in possession of by,
Just blows my mind. So again, if you want to see that full video, check us out on Patreon. It is really, really worth the watch. It was a fascinating conversation, and we really hope you guys enjoyed it.
As always, at the end of our episodes, we like to give a big shout out to our VIPs over on Patreon, as well as all the other wonderful folks that are supporting us over there. So big shout out to
Mayhem Mudkip, Steven Centauri, Lisa, Nova, Kevinus Musicus, Judy, Hillary, Brian, Bob, Atlantean Jedi, and Carrie. Thank you all so much. And I will say, with those of you who do support us on Patreon, we were able to get 2 new cameras. So we've got one of them hooked up right now. We're going to be playing around with some different views. And as always, we're working to improve the podcast and make it even better. We've got some huge stuff lined up for the new year. So onward and upwards.
Oh my God. The amount of plans we have, and then they just keep growing because we get inspired or we see something new or whatever. And you guys are all a huge part toward making that happen. So thank you so much.
Whether you contribute or you listen or you spread the word, every little bit helps, and it
Yes.
means so much to us. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been
The
Grim
Grim
Curriculum.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't think we need to do a fun fact at the end of that one. I feel like the whole thing was a fun fact.
Right?